So there are a lot of problems going on at the moment, and we we these hedge fund managers perhaps can't be blamed for the policy of the Federal Reserve which started this whole thing, and for Lehman Brothers, who's were, of which the NWO threatened Hank Paulson not to lend to Lehman Brothers, which caused the financial collapse in the United States, which spread to Europe, and yet they cannot be blamed for Berlusconi or Papadimos's splurge of money in the public sector in Italy, when you've got 12% expenditures above the GDP per year each year. It all adds up. But these hedge fund managers are still vultures. They're still trying to pick over the bones of Europe to transfer wealth from the poorest people to the richest people, and that can't be right. It's not moral, and they shouldn't be allowed to claim insurance on credit default swaps which they don't own. That should be fraud and a criminal offence. And the Europeans, and David Cameron particularly, should stop trying to. David Cameron particularly should stop trying to defend them, the hedge fund and managers, the banks, and the financial elite, and start to do what Merkel and Sarkozy have said, and what Obama is becoming increasingly open to, and that is an international financial transaction tax, a Tobin tax in effect. Although the Swedes have done it on a small scale, and I can understand their reluctance to use that tax, because of course everyone went from Stockholm to Zurich. The European Union and the United States is completely different magnitude and scale. You know, if the United States and Europe got a transaction tax zone that was big enough, are all the banks going to go to communist China or India, where they will have to pay off massive amounts of money to corrupt officials to operate there, and they do not have the financial they do not have the security that the Europeans and Americans give them. You know, if those banks go bust in China or India, they're not going to get bailed out by the central government. The people would say that the bailing out the banks was the wrong thing to do, but if we hadn't bailed out the banks, it's your deposit money that the banks would have stolen, and there would have been no way that we could have got that back. Yeah? So, again, Cameron cannot blame Labour for bailing out the banks. His party supported bailing out the banks because he is friends with bankers. You know? It's all smoke and mirrors with the Tory party, and they're playing a very dangerous and two-faced game with Europe's economy. That's the problem for me, and I would like to see a major investigation into these hedge funds, and also into the rating agencies. Who do these people, the rating agencies, work for? Who are they accountable to? And when Moody's says that France's AAA rating has been downgraded, and then they say then they claim that they've made a mistake, and then they apologise. You know, that hurt France's economy. We also, in America, have nearly 40 million people living on food stamps, food handouts, and in Europe it's nearly as bad, 18 million people. And the common agricultural policy at the moment is that Britain has convinced Germany and France and Italy to do is to cut the funding for the European Social Fund for food. For food, so that food will either be wasted, or it will be exported to third world African markets, which will undercut supply of African farmers, and lead to starvation, which the Union will be expected to bail out, because the Africans are always talking about the responsibility of Europeans, but they never hold their own central governments, which are often run by dictators and tribal chiefs and feudalist crime families, to account. Why? Because they get their heads and hands chopped off. So Europe is always asked to be the saviour of foreign countries, foreign entities, I should say. At the same time, it's got people who are destitute, who may be working 2 or 3 jobs but still can't afford to feed themselves, and yet the money that the European Union needs to spend is being denied to it by countries such as Britain. If you look at the efficiency of national governments versus the European Union, the European Union's expenditure is 1% of the GDP of Europe, and it has consistently balanced its budget. The proportionality of what it spends on the European on subsidising or supporting small farmers in France can be criticised, and rightfully so, in the European CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. But the existence of the Common Agricultural Policy gives Europe food security. In a time when there is increasing, when we had the Soviet Union fall, and then in its place the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, which has since seemed to break apart, and as Putin has tried to re-establish a sort of Russian sphere of influence through the Eurasian Union treaty organisation, in an attempt to stave off Chinese influence from Kazakhstan, where the Chinese are building oil pipelines, and also down into Burma and other parts of their allies. It sees that Russia is making a shift towards Europe, but they might still cut off our oil and gas supplies if there is a conflict in the Middle East, such as Syria or Iran, caused by the Israelis or the Iranians fighting each other, or the Saudis fighting each other, which goes into Pakistan and many other things, topics that I've covered in my other video, the Arab Spring and the Syrian vortex. But it means that the small and declining population of Russia may see that it's got closer links to Europe than it has to Asia, and this may mean that we have greater security in terms of our economic development as a continent, because we have better supplies of fuel from Russia, which is a country which is increasingly becoming dominated by Oriental and Muslim peoples from the Far East of Russia and Central Asia, including Han Chinese in the Russian Far East.